Welcome to the annual convention of the Diocese of Western Kansas. We're gathered here to celebrate our life and ministry together in this place. I wondered about the Dean's selection of propers for today, dealing with the martyrdom of Hugh Latimer, Nicholas Ridley, and Thomas Cranmer, and having the bishop preach on martyred bishops. We'll deal with it. Hugh Latimer was Bishop of Worcester, as they say over there. Nicholas Ridley of Rochester, and sometime Bishop of London. Both burned at the stake on October the 16th, 1555 by Mary, Queen of England, oldest daughter of Henry VIII, eldest sister of Elizabeth I. A few months later, in March of 1556, Thomas Cranmer was also burned at the stake. They went to the stake as Anglican bishops who refused to recant and return to the Roman Catholic Church that Mary was trying to reestablish in England at that time. They went to the stake for what they believed and refused to give in to. Interestingly enough, on a sidelight, Mary herself died only 2 years later in 1558. And then Elizabeth I came to the throne, and the rest, they say, is history. But as the story goes, at the stake with Nicholas Ridley and Hugh Latimer, at the stake, Latimer says to Ridley, "Be of good spirit, Master Ridley, and play the man. We shall this day light such a candle by God's grace in England that, as I trust, shall never be put out." But light a candle of evangelism, a candle of renewed faith, a candle of a new religion almost in England. And so I think I find this morning's collect for Latimer, Ridley, and Cranmer so inviting, if you will, because it invites us that we will live in God's fear, die in His favor, and rest in His peace. Bishops haven't been martyred for a while, at least since the Anglican Bishop of Uganda back in the 80s. But there's a certain sense that this goes on sometimes. And you know, sometimes I think it might be easier to die for one's faith than to live for it. Everywhere I go around the church these days, people are saying to me, "How is the grand experiment of Western Kansas going? How are you doing with this bishop thing and rector thing that hasn't been done since William White in colonial days?" And you smile and say, "Well, you know, everything's going fine." But on the inside, I need to tell you, my friends and family, that the bishop is very, very tired. And it's his own fault. He has tried to function like big dioceses sometimes. And we realize we can't do this. They call up and say, "Well, have your canon to the ordinary call my canon to the ordinary." So I have to look out and find Tony and say, "You're canon to the ordinary for today." Or they'll call Tony from New York and say, who is your transition minister for this diocese?" And so she yells across the hall, "Is it your week or my week to do that?" So after almost 2 years of this, I've discovered we need to be doing it a little differently. I was talking to Ashley Knoll earlier today and saying that in a few more years, it's my intent, with notes I've been keeping, to sit down and talk about this whole grand experiment in an article or a book. And part of that is to distill the essence of the episcopate. What is it that bishops ought to be doing? And what is it that they do that maybe they ought not to be doing? And so we're going to have to look at some changes, I think, for my own well-being and for a reimagination of the diocese and the episcopate. Some of these things are very practical. My wife and I are already looking at next year's calendar. We've already blocked out 4 one-week vacations, one a quarter, to get away, to go someplace. Along with that, we're going to begin regional confirmations. There will be a confirmation in each region each year. And that's because the visitation schedule for churches will go out to a 3-year cycle, as allowed by canon law. But we'll provide confirmations everywhere at least once a year. Now, if you want to call me sometime and say, listen, I can't wait till the next regional confirmation. I've got 35 people that need to be confirmed. Trust me, we'll be there that Sunday to take care of that. So, we're going to make some changes, but I think the changes we're going to make, I think, are going to impact not only Western Kansas, but other dioceses that are looking at doing the same thing. The Diocese of Northern Michigan, who has a bishop as well as a diocesan missioner. The Diocese of North Dakota, where Bishop Smith is now also the dean of the cathedral. We need to look at the Diocese of Eastern Oregon, and they've talked to me several times about how can they do this once their provisional bishop retires or resigns. The Diocese of Eau Claire has been very outspoken about they're electing a half-time bishop, and their job description says 20 hours a week. And you got to figure out how to be paid the other half of your salary. Good luck. 20 hours a week just won't do it. Now, unlike my brothers, Cranmer and Latimer and Ridley, I really have no desire to die for the faith. As one of my conscience people said in my office here a while back, he came in and said, you know, this is a great experiment we're doing in the Episcopal Church, and it's not looking very good if our bishop dies early. Dying for the faith is easy. It's a one-time act of self-giving. I'm sure that given the choice, Latimer and Ridley and Cranmer would have much preferred to live on for their faith rather than to die for it. I'm sure they would have much preferred to continue that daily struggle of building up the church and equipping the saints for ministry. But living out the faith, what does that mean to us? What does that mean to you as an individual? Because only you will put meaning to its definition. It's like this. If someone asks you where you go to church, do you respond, oh yes, I belong to St. Martin's, and I go there every Christmas and Easter? Is that living out the faith? At this time of stewardship, is your pledge to the church going to be the same $10 a month that it was 10 years ago? I'm coming back to that one. How is your living out the faith going to grow the church? But an even bigger question is, are you even interested in growing the church? The other day I stopped in the Quick Shop for an Arnold Palmer. That's half iced tea and half lemonade. You can put something else in it later if you want. And as I was paying for my drink, the young man behind the counter said, "That's a nice looking purple shirt you got on. That's really slick looking." I said, "Thank you." He said, "That new collar configuration, is that something modern now?" And I said, "No, clergy tend to wear these things." He thought about it for a moment and said, "What's a clergy?" well, priests wear black ones, bishops wear purple ones, things like that. He said, well, you learn something new every day. The point being, the world is full of people who need to hear what we have to say. It's not just because they don't recognize clerical collars and purple shirts. It's because they don't know who Jesus is either. And so when we share our faith, that is part of how we're going to grow the church. There was a family supper group at our parish a few weeks ago, and this is for the 30-somethings with lots of kids. It's a great organization, a great group. But at the end of the evening, one of them posted on Facebook, and she wrote, I just love my church family supper group. We had another fun meeting tonight. If anyone is looking for a church home with some people who know how to have fun and lots of laughter, give us a shot. It was interesting because one of the responses that popped up not long after was, tempting. Glad you found a good community. It's what we're looking for, a place to belong. Unfortunately, this couple lived in San Antonio. But there are people looking for a place to belong. They're looking for the community that we have to offer. They're looking for a place where you go and they know your name, like Cheers. And so we have to ask ourselves, why aren't we growing the church when so many people want to be part of it? Well, growing the church is easy. All you have to do is ask someone, want to come to church? Or come to church with me? And a lot of you will say, well, everybody I know already goes to church. Well, I'll tell you, 60% of the people you know don't go to church. They might have gone there when they were 4 years old, but they haven't been back. And they're looking for a place to go. So invite them anyway. Bring them along. But again, the ultimate question, do you really want the church to grow? Do you really want new members? Are you happy with the way you are and you don't want to grow? You like the people around you. You like seeing the same people every day. You don't want to add new people to that list. Maybe you don't want to make the pond larger because you might have to share responsibility with someone. Or maybe you don't want somebody that's in there who, doesn't look like one of us, or as we say down south, they're not our kind of people. We want everybody to look like us and talk like us and act like us and wear the same kind of clothes we wear and work in the same places. Well, if we do, then, we're not going to grow. It's just not going to happen. We have to be willing to take a risk. And every time I talk about taking a risk, I always have to tell the story of Sean the Episcopalian. Sean came to our church first when he was about 3 years old. 3? Yeah. I'm looking for confirmation back here. And he had an older brother then, Aiden. He had a younger sister, but she hadn't been born yet. And his mom and dad were there for the first Sunday. And when you're there for the first Sunday, you're a little nervous about what's going to go on. Do I sit or stand or kneel? How do I go along with the church? Can I do this? Can I do that? Can I go to coffee hour? If I go to coffee hour, do I have to pay for it? Nobody showed me where the restroom was. And I have to go. But Sean the Episcopalian. Now remember, Sean has Down syndrome. So in the middle of the service, Sean breaks away from mom and dad, gets down on the floor and crawls under the pews and goes this way, back 4 or 5 or 6 pews, and pops up in the back corner. And mom and dad are just horrified. They've lost their son. How are people going to respond to a Down syndrome child popping up in their midst? Well, by God's good grace, Sean popped up in a nest of grandmothers, old maid aunts, and mothers. And they scooped Sean up, and they loved on him, and he had a blast back there. The next week, cookies materialized in the back row. And toys. And now every Sunday morning it was the thing where Sean snuck up to the pews and went to the back row. And popped up back there where he was scooped up and loved and cared for. His mother and father have a great deal of involvement in programs for handicapped children. And his mother on her blog wrote a blog about Sean the Episcopalian. And she wrote that her 3-year-old Down syndrome son had found his church. And now she suspected that she and her husband had too. God works in mysterious ways. Sometimes the children do lead us into larger understandings. So we have to ask ourselves, do we really want this church to grow? And if we do, are we willing to live into it? Are we willing to make the effort that it's going to take to increase our numbers, to spread the gospel, to share the good news of Jesus Christ with everyone we encounter? We found it absolutely amazing not many weeks ago when we had to take part in the sad service for Dennis Zimmerman's funeral. But to find out that everywhere you went in Dodge City, they knew Father Zimmerman. Whether you went to the Oriental restaurant or the Burger King or wherever it went, they knew Zimmerman. They might not all be going to St. Cornelius, but they knew that God loved them because Dennis told them so. Are we willing to live into that ourselves? When we grow, we're going to have to change. We're going to look different sometimes. We're going to think different sometimes. One has to remember that we are in the Diocese of Western Kansas, not Long Island, or the Diocese of Texas. Our churches are not necessarily going to look like St. Thomas in New York City or even Grace Cathedral in Topeka. They're going to look a lot like St. Francis in Russell Springs or the Church of the Upper Room in Milliken. And let me say, if you ever have a chance to go to the Upper Room, take a busload of people and go out there and show up on Sunday morning and see what house churches look like. And you will be filled with a sense of faith and the power of the Spirit that resides there. I told Rita I'd put that plug in for her. Yes, they serve lunch, so let them know you're coming. They'll put an extra pot on for you. Maybe the living of our faith is going to take us outside of our comfort zones, and I'm sure that it will. Inviting folks to come to church who don't look like us takes courage. And remember, when they come to our church, don't leave them sitting in the pew by themselves. Sit there with them. Show them how to use that complicated thing we call the prayer book. And when it's over with, take them back to coffee hour. Tell them, no, we won't charge you this week. But they have these, am I invited to go back there? Can I do that? Say yes. Let them know. We call all of this by the E word, evangelism. We're not real thrilled with that, but that's what it is. And the best definition of evangelism came out of a conference back in 1918, and it was reaffirmed by General Convention in 1973. And unless they've changed it, nobody told me about it, it's still the official definition. And it goes like this: evangelism is the presentation of Jesus Christ in the power of the Holy Spirit in such ways that persons may be led to believe in him as Savior and follow him as Lord within the fellowship of the church. And we do this by simply telling someone why I love Jesus. I go to the Episcopal Church because, and you may find the same reasons there as well. There's something that brings you here. It's something good. Share that. Now, I think there are some things that can help the diocese that I would like to see put in place in some ways. They're not exactly what we might call evangelism, but maybe again they are. After this convention's over, it's my intention to appoint a Hispanic task force ministry. If you'd like to serve on that, give me a call or write me a note while you're here. Don't tell me because I'll forget, but write it down and give it to Tony. We need to get this off of the ground. We've gotten a few $1,000s from the Domestic Missionary Partnership. We have a working agreement with the Episcopal Church Hispanic Ministries and the Hispanic Ministries of the ELCA Lutheran Church out west. So we're ready to go. We're hoping we can do this, but we need people to help us out. I think another group that already exists, but probably should exist throughout the diocese, would be the Daughters of the King. This is a group for women whose purpose is prayer and study and service. If you want to know if somebody's praying for you, be assured the daughters are, wherever you are. There's a chapter here in Salina. There's one in McPherson. There's one in Hutchinson. We need chapters in Great Bend, Garden City, Dodge City, Colby, all over. And so I didn't ask her, but I'll volunteer Patty Wamsley to go and do that for you. She may not talk to me anymore. But Patty, if they invite you out there, I'll pay your way. Spirituality, community, what the daughters bring together. On the other side of the coin, there's a group called the Brotherhood of St. Andrew. Used to be bigger. I think the only chapter that exists now is in Hutchinson, and there's only about 2 people there, or 3 people. But men, if you'd like to get together to pray, to do community service, to study, we can make that happen. We have a couple of guys at Hutch who'll be glad to come and talk with you and help you get this off the ground. I'd like to see us re-energize the Episcopal Church women at the diocese and at the local level. We're losing a great resource here that we had for years and years and years. We say the role of women changed, and we sort of lost that impetus for the ECWs. And, I remember years and years ago going to an ECW meeting and they had somebody come from TWA and show them how to pack a suitcase. Well, I think we want more than that now. But there's more that can be done. And if nothing else, it brings the women together in community. And out of community comes service. And along with ECWs, I'd like to see new men's groups pop up all over the diocese. I know that St. Cornelius had one that goes on. We keep talking about doing it at Hutch. And their whole purpose is maybe to get together once a month and sit down and eat. But out of that grows great ministry sometimes. My first congregation is St. Matthew's Mission in Lexington, Kentucky. We had a men's group, and all they did was get together once a month and eat. But out of their eating came service projects, rebuilding parts of the parish itself, redoing floors and yards and stripping floors. Because they'd get together one night and they'd say, "Charlie, these floors look like the devil. What are we paying the sexton?" And Charlie'd say, "Listen, I know where we can get some good floor machines and some stripping compound. And so how many of you guys want to be here Saturday morning at 7 o'clock and we'll take care of this?" And so you got 12 or 15 people saying, we'll be there. One of them says, I'll volunteer to cook a pot of soup. We'll spend the day, we'll take care of it. And you come in on Sunday morning and you've got floors that look like glass mirrors. That's working for the kingdom in many ways. And those men working together then learn to pray together. And from cleaning floors, they'll go down and work in the soup kitchen together. We've seen it happen over and over and over again. I think if we're going to be Christian people who do Christian things, we ought to know why we do it. I think we need more Bible study groups. People will sometimes will come to me and say, Father or Bishop, I think we need a Bible study group that meets on Wednesday at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And I say, I think we do. When are you going to start it? And they'll say, well, I'm not qualified to start a Bible study group. I said, can you read English? Yes, you're qualified. Just open the Bible and start reading. Later on, if you want materials, we can make you do that. We have a group of men who meet every Thursday morning at 7 a.m. in Hutchinson. We call it a Bible reading group, not study. Over the 8 or 9 years they've been meeting, they have read through the Bible probably 10 times. From Genesis all the way through the maps. And when they're done, they go back and they start over again. And some days they may read 4 or 5 or 6 chapters. Some days they may read 2 verses and somebody will say, wait a minute. That's the darndest thing I've ever heard. I want to talk about that. And we talk about it. I don't lead the group. Somebody else does. I simply say, what do you think about that? What's it mean to you? Where do we go? Bible study, formal and informal. If we're going to grow, we need to do something very personal. We need to be involved on a daily basis in prayer, as individuals and as groups. We need to take out our prayer books and find morning prayer and evening prayer and noonday prayers and prayers for the early evening and compline. And if those are too long, there's a certain little section here called family prayers, which are like 1 page each. But do something. Talk to God in some way. And then listen for God to talk back to you. Or maybe you can get 3 or 4 people together to meet someplace for a prayer group. Maybe at church, in a chapel, at somebody's home. But we're never going to hear the voice of God talking to us if we don't talk to God and then get out of the way and let Him speak back to us. Along with that, we might find new ways of worshiping together. Morning prayer. You can imagine what it would be like if 4 or 5 people got together, maybe not every morning, but 3 mornings a week, and did morning prayer out of the prayer book. Or evening prayer. Or maybe met someplace for lunch and did noonday prayers and then had lunch. Just making it part of your life in what you do. Taizé. It's an interesting service. The youth do it at our church on Thursday nights. Come down and take a peek at it. It's quiet, it's meditative, there's music. The Spirit sort of hovers and moves in the Taizé service. Be involved in it. Finally, be involved in community outreach. Do something for somebody other than yourself. Go down and serve food at the food shelter or the soup kitchen. Give away clothes at the clothes closet. Work at the homeless shelter. Be part of Meals on Wheels. Do something because Christ said, take care of the least and the lost of these, my brothers. Reach out. Give of yourself. It was interesting. We had an anonymous member of the parish come recently and says, I will give the parish food pantry $3,000 if members of the congregation can make up another $3,000. It's a matching challenge. So we tossed that out to the congregation and said, anonymous donor wants to give us $3,000 if we can match it. And it began kind of slow. We wondered if we'd make it or not. But then it picked up speed. And then people began to send money from around the diocese and around the country. And now when we take what we've raised to match the $3,000 and add it to the $3,000, we have over $8,000 to be used for a small food pantry, which gets a lot of use these days. But it was amazing to me how many people wanted to participate in that. And the contributions to this matching grant came in fives and tens and 50s and hundreds and 500s and even 1,000. Because people thought that was something good. We're living into our faith in that way. So give of yourself. When you give, you receive. Open up your churches to Alcoholics Anonymous, Narcotics Anonymous, ALS support groups, Boy Scouts, St. Francis Community Services. I think our facilities should be open and used 24 hours, 7 days a week. Otherwise, they just sit empty. Let's use them. Volunteer for something. Get out there. Take the love of Christ to the people in the street. Okay, the topic nobody wants to talk about, stewardship. How many congregations these days have an every member canvas? Some of the little congregations out west say, well, we don't do that. We've only got 27 people. We know what everybody gives. Well, I'll bet you don't. And until you ask them, you're not going to find out. If you haven't done one, I think you should do it. Ask people to give. Ask them to have the joy of giving. Ask them to give out of a sense of generosity. Ask them to tithe. There's a novel idea. And remember that when we talk about the tithe in the church, the tithe is not what you give to the church, like I tithe to the church. Well, unless you give 10%, you're not tithing. Biblical standard is 10%. Now, I maintain in the Bible we have 3 levels of giving from 3 stories. We have the biblical tithe of 10%. And that's 10% of the first fruits, by the way. But then we have the contributions of Zacchaeus, the tax collector, who Jesus converts. And Zacchaeus says, to anyone I have cheated, I will pay restitution up to 50% of my fortune. So Zacchaeus is willing to give away 50% of what he's got. So you've got 10% and you've got 50%. Or you could be like the widow at the temple who drops her 2 copper coins in the offering box and goes home. And that was all she had. So here's your choice: 10%, 50%, or 100%. If you want to go back to tithing, that's fine. We won't argue over whether that's net or gross. Because if you start giving 10%, it'll be great. Congregations, if your people are going to tithe, if they're going to give, then do a budget. And don't be shy about it. Let people know what it costs to operate a church. Let people know what altar candles cost, what a bottle of wine costs, what it costs to pay the utility bill every week. And remind those people that Kansas Gas and Westar Electric does not give us a discount for being a church. We pay the same rates as everybody else. People are sometimes astounded at what it cost us to operate a church. My people in Grace Church look at me like I've grown a second head or something when I say, it cost us $1,000 a day to operate this parish. How many days can you sign up for? Do the budget. Do the stewardship. Be good stewards of your finances. Finally, let's talk about Christian formation and ministry. Christian formation. Pre-baptism confirmation classes for people. Remember, these can be taught by anyone. You don't have to be ordained to teach a baptismal class or a confirmation class. We've got wonderful materials for this. If there's a willingness to teach it, we will give you the tools to do that with. But let's instruct our people on what it means to be a follower of Jesus, what it means to be a Christian, and then what it means to be an Episcopalian. Volunteer for lay ministries, and we need so many of these things. And the Episcopal Church has a number of licensed ministries: lay reader, Eucharistic minister, catechist, preacher. And in some places we may even begin to put in lay vicars for some of our congregations who need some administrative oversight. There's also opportunities for Sunday school and youth ministry and all these things. But unless you're willing to live for your faith, unless you're willing to be involved in these things, we're not going to grow. Unless you're willing to say, okay, I will sit down with the youth group and work with those people, even if there's only 2 of them, and one is 19 and one is 12. If you want to, you can make it work. Will we live for our faith? That's harder than dying for it. Latimer said to Ridley, "Be of good spirit, Master Ridley, and play the man. We shall this day light such a candle by God's grace in England as I trust shall never be put out." I hope that by us willing to live for our faith, we too might light such a candle in western Kansas that by God's grace will never be put out. Remember, we have something unique. We have something to share. We have the joy of Christ. We have the power of prayer. We have the mysticism of prayer and sacraments. We have God in our midst. We have everything we need. As the old evangelist Billy Sunday said, if the Episcopal Church is a sleeping giant, and if it ever woke up and got itself going, it would take over the world. But we have to be willing to live for our faith, not to lie down and die for it, but to stand up and be willing to take whatever it needs to make it work. Some churches have said, well, how are we going to survive? If you want to survive, you will. And if you don't, you won't. But are you willing to live for the faith or die for the faith? And that's a question each one of us has to ask ourselves individually and as congregations. So as we remember Archbishop Cranmer, Bishops Latimer and Ridley, I'm sure they would have wanted to continue living for their faith. Remember, martyrs have names, have dates named after them and places on the calendar and special services. For those of us who live for the faith, maybe someday we'll get a gold watch, or maybe just a decent burial. But what we will leave behind is a legacy for generations to come. I want us to begin lighting candles that no one will ever put out. And that 100 years from now, people in western Kansas will say, yes, we know about the Episcopal Church. They're the ones who run the medical clinic in Russell Springs. They're the ones who have the great feeding pantry in Ulysses. They have the community outreach and job center in Goodland. Without those people, life would be a whole lot less. So let us light candles. Let us become living testaments of faith. Let us live for it.